Most people think loneliness looks like an empty house. They're wrong. Sometimes it looks like a promise that never stopped breathing. The rain had been falling over Maplewood Park for nearly 3 hours, turning the winding pathways into ribbons of silver beneath the glow of old street lamps. Cars rolled past the park entrance without slowing, their headlights cutting through the mist before disappearing into the gray afternoon. Near the center of the park stood a weathered wooden bench facing the road, and on that bench sat Samuel Carter. Every day at exactly 4 o'clock, he arrived wearing the same dark overcoat, carrying the same worn leather satchel. It didn't matter if the summer heat pushed past 90 degrees or if winter winds sliced through town with frozen fingers. Samuel always came. The people of Maplewood had grown used to seeing him there. Parents walking their dogs nodded politely. Teenagers passed by without a second glance. Store owners across the street occasionally watched him through their windows while wiping counters or serving coffee. Most of them had created their own version of his story. Some believed he had no family left. Others assumed he simply had nowhere else to go. A few whispered that age had stolen pieces of his memory and left him trapped in routines he could no longer explain. But Samuel never corrected anyone. He simply sat and waited. On this particular afternoon, rain tapped softly against the brim of his old military cap. Tiny droplets gathered on the bronze veteran pin fastened above his heart. His hands rested calmly atop a wooden cane polished smooth by decades of use. He seemed perfectly still, yet his eyes remained fixed on the road beyond the park gates. Not wandering, not distracted, watching, waiting. Across the street, 32-year-old reporter Olivia Brooks lowered the camera she had been using to film a segment about local community stories. She had noticed Samuel before. Everyone had. But something about the sight of him sitting there in the rain stirred her curiosity. While her cameraman packed equipment into the station van, Olivia remained beneath the awning of a nearby coffee shop, studying the old veteran through the curtain of falling water. He wasn't looking at the sky. He wasn't looking at the people around him. He was looking for something, or someone. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. The rain grew heavier. Pedestrians hurried toward shelter. Park benches emptied. Even the birds vanished beneath tree branches. Samuel stayed exactly where he was. Finally, Olivia crossed the street. Water splashed against her boots as she approached the bench. Up close, she noticed details most people missed. The careful shine on his shoes. The folded handkerchief tucked neatly into his coat pocket. The faint edge of a yellowed envelope peeking from inside his satchel. Nothing about him felt careless. Nothing about him felt lost. He looked like a man following instructions only he could hear. Olivia stopped beside the bench. Samuel glanced toward her for the first time. His dark eyes were calm and steady beneath silver brows. "Sir," she said gently, brushing rain from her sleeve. "Can I ask you something?" Samuel offered a small nod. Olivia hesitated before speaking again. "Why do you come here every single day?" For a moment, only the sound of rainfall filled the space between them. Then Samuel looked back toward the road. His voice, when it came, was quiet but certain. "Because she promised she'd come back." Olivia felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "Who did?" she asked. Samuel's fingers tightened slightly around the handle of his cane. A distant smile touched the corner of his mouth. Not sad, not hopeful, simply patient. He watched the empty road as though expecting someone to appear at any moment. "That," he said softly, "is a very long story." Olivia stood beside the bench for another few seconds, expecting the old man to continue. But Samuel Carter simply returned his attention to the road. The rain softened into a mist that drifted through the park like a veil, blurring the distant headlights and turning the street lamps into pale golden circles. Whatever story lived behind those words, it was not one he intended to share with a stranger on a rainy afternoon. Olivia thanked him quietly and stepped away. As she walked back toward her news van, she glanced over her shoulder one last time. Samuel had not moved. He sat exactly as before, his eyes fixed on the road beyond the gates. It was as though the entire world could change around him while he remained anchored to a single promise. The image stayed with her long after she left the park. The next morning, Maplewood woke beneath a blanket of low gray clouds. Coffee shops opened their doors. Delivery trucks rolled through downtown. Children hurried toward school carrying backpacks nearly as large as they were. Life moved forward the way it always did. Yet Olivia found herself thinking about the veteran on the bench. During lunch, she opened her laptop and began searching public records. Samuel Carter, 82 years old, United States Army veteran, resident of Maplewood for nearly 3 decades. No criminal record, no recent family information, no social media presence, no obvious explanation for why he spent every afternoon sitting on the same park bench. The lack of information only deepened the mystery. By late afternoon, curiosity pulled her back to the park. As she approached, she was not surprised to find Samuel already there. 4 o'clock sharp. The same bench, the same overcoat, the same satchel resting beside him. But this time Olivia noticed something new. People noticed him. An elderly couple walking their dog slowed as they passed. A teenage boy on a bicycle glanced toward him. A woman carrying groceries offered a sympathetic smile. Everyone seemed to know who Samuel was. Yet nobody actually spoke to him. It was as though he had become part of the landscape, familiar but distant, like the clock tower downtown or the old oak tree beside City Hall. Olivia decided to ask around. The owner of the nearby coffee shop had seen Samuel for years. A florist across the street remembered him arriving every afternoon, no matter the weather. A retired teacher claimed she had never once seen him miss a day. Every conversation ended the same way. Nobody knew who he was waiting for. Nobody knew why he waited. They only knew that he always came back. As sunset painted the clouds with streaks of amber and violet, Olivia watched Samuel from across the street. For nearly 2 hours he remained perfectly still. Then, just as the first evening stars began appearing overhead, he slowly reached into his satchel. From inside, he removed a yellowed envelope. Its edges were worn and softened by time. The paper looked fragile enough to crumble if handled carelessly. Samuel opened it with remarkable gentleness. He unfolded the contents and read silently beneath the fading light. Olivia could not see the words. She could barely see the paper itself from where she stood. But she noticed the change in his face. For the first time, the calm expression slipped. Not into sadness. Not into regret. Something deeper. Something that looked like memory itself. After several moments, Samuel folded the letter carefully and returned it to the envelope. Then he looked back toward the road. Cars passed. Streetlights flickered on. The evening air cooled. Yet his eyes remained fixed on the same distant point beyond the park gates. As if every day for years had led to this exact moment. As if tomorrow might finally be different. Olivia felt a strange certainty settle inside her. This was not the story of a lonely old man. It was the story of a promise. And somewhere beyond Maplewood, someone else might still be carrying the other half of it. The following week, Olivia could not let the story go. Every assignment she covered seemed to end the same way. Her thoughts drifted back to the veteran on the bench and the yellowed envelope hidden inside his satchel. By Thursday morning, she finally pitched the idea to her station manager. It was not a breaking news story. It was not politics, crime, or weather. It was simply a human story. A man waiting. Surprisingly, her manager agreed. By noon, Olivia found herself standing once again beneath the towering maple trees of the park, this time carrying a camera crew and a notebook. Samuel arrived exactly at 4 o'clock. Not 4:01. Not 3:59. 4 o'clock. He walked slowly through the gate, his cane tapping softly against the pavement. The late autumn air carried the scent of damp leaves and chimney smoke from nearby houses. Children laughed near the playground. A distant train whistle drifted across town. Samuel acknowledged none of it. His attention remained fixed on the familiar bench. Olivia approached carefully. "Mr. Carter," she said, "would you mind if I sat with you for a while?" Samuel glanced at her and offered a faint smile. "You came back." "I did. Most people do not." Olivia sat beside him. For several minutes neither spoke. Cars rolled past beyond the park entrance. The sky slowly shifted from blue to gold. Finally, Olivia broke the silence. "How long have you been coming here?" Samuel kept his eyes on the road. "A long time." "Years?" "Yes." "Decades?" For the first time, he nodded. Olivia felt her pulse quicken. "And all this time, you have been waiting for the same person?" Samuel rested both hands on the handle of his cane. "Yes." His answer was simple, certain, unshaken. Olivia expected bitterness in his voice. Regret. Disappointment. Instead, she heard something else. Faith. The kind of faith that survives long after logic gives up. Across town, the station aired a short teaser that evening. A 30-second clip showing Samuel sitting on the bench beneath falling leaves. The segment ended with a single question. Who is the mysterious person he has been waiting for all these years? The response surprised everyone. By morning, hundreds of comments had appeared online. Some viewers believed he was waiting for a lost love. Others guessed a daughter or granddaughter. Several people claimed they had seen him there for years. One woman wrote that she remembered seeing him on that same bench when she was still in high school. Another insisted her father had pointed Samuel out 20 years earlier. Suddenly, the entire town seemed fascinated by the man they had spent years overlooking. Yet the attention changed nothing. At 4 o'clock that afternoon, Samuel returned to the bench exactly as before. No television cameras. No audience. No performance. Just the same quiet routine. Olivia noticed something important then. He was not waiting because people were watching. He had been doing this long before anyone cared. That evening, she received a phone call from an elderly resident named Walter Jennings. Walter claimed he had known Samuel for years through the local Veterans Association. Olivia met him at a small diner near the highway. Steam rose from fresh coffee as rain tapped softly against the windows. Walter listened carefully before speaking. Most folks think they know Samuel, he said. Truth is, nobody does. Did he ever tell you who he is waiting for? Olivia asked. Walter shook his head. Never. Not once. Then what do you know? The old man leaned back and stared through the diner window. I know this. In all the years I have known him, I never heard him complain. Not a single time. Most people wait a few weeks and lose hope. Samuel waited years and somehow held on to it. Olivia looked down at her notebook. Hope for what? Walter's eyes softened. That is the question, isn't it? Outside, headlights slid across the rain-dark pavement. Somewhere across town, Samuel Carter was probably sitting alone in his apartment. The envelope was likely resting beside him on a table worn smooth with age. And for the first time, Olivia began to suspect that the answer was hidden not in the person Samuel was waiting for, but in the promise that had kept him waiting all these years. 3 days later, Olivia found herself standing outside a modest brick apartment building on the eastern edge of Maplewood. The address had come from public records, but she hesitated before knocking. Something about Samuel's story felt fragile, like an old photograph left too long in the sun. One careless touch could damage it. After a moment, she lowered her hand and stepped back. She was a reporter, not an investigator searching for secrets that were never offered. If Samuel wanted his story told, it would have to happen on his terms. That afternoon, she returned to the park. A cold wind swept fallen leaves across the sidewalk, spinning them in circles before carrying them toward the road. Samuel was already there. As always. As expected, yet something was different. Resting beside him on the bench was a small paper bag from a bakery downtown. Olivia approached with a smile. Good afternoon, Mr. Carter. Samuel nodded. You are becoming part of the routine. I hope that is not a bad thing. Not yet. Olivia laughed softly and sat beside him. For a few minutes they watched the traffic together. Then Samuel reached into the paper bag and removed a sugar cookie shaped like a star. He held it carefully, studying it for a moment before placing it back inside. Olivia noticed immediately. You are not going to eat it? Samuel shook his head. It is not for me. Before she could ask another question, a young mother pushing a stroller passed by. A little girl walked beside her, no older than 7. Samuel called out gently, Excuse me. The mother stopped. Samuel smiled and offered the cookie. The little girl's eyes brightened. She accepted it with both hands and thanked him before continuing down the path. Olivia watched the exchange. You do that often? Every Friday. Why? Samuel looked toward the distant road again. Someone used to like those cookies. The answer only deepened the mystery. Later that evening, Olivia sat in the station archive room reviewing old newspapers from decades earlier. Dust floated through the glow of computer screens. Most searches revealed nothing useful. Samuel Carter appeared only occasionally in local records. A veterans parade. A charity fundraiser. A church food drive. Small mentions scattered across many years. Then she found something unusual. A newspaper photograph from 38 years ago. The image showed a community picnic held in Maplewood Park. Families sat on blankets beneath summer sunshine. Children ran through sprinklers. In the background, partially obscured by a tree, sat a younger Samuel Carter. Olivia leaned closer. Beside him was a child. The photograph was grainy and faded, making details difficult to identify, but the child appeared to be holding a star-shaped cookie. Olivia stared at the image. Her pulse quickened. The same cookie, the same park, nearly 4 decades earlier. The next afternoon, she brought a printed copy with her. Samuel arrived as usual and settled onto the bench. Olivia handed him the photograph. For a long moment, he said nothing. The sounds of the park seemed to fade away. Even the traffic felt distant. His fingers moved carefully across the worn paper, not touching the faces, touching the empty space between them. "Where did you find this?" he asked quietly. "An old newspaper archive." Samuel smiled. It was a smile touched by memory rather than happiness. "I have not seen this picture in years." Olivia looked at the child beside him. "Who is she?" For the first time since she had met him, Samuel did not answer immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the photograph. The autumn sunlight reflected softly across its faded surface. Finally, he folded the picture and handed it back. Someone who made a promise. Then he looked toward the road once more. Not as a man trapped in the past, not as a man lost in memory, but as a man who still believed the future might arrive at any moment. The question lingered between them long after the sun disappeared behind the rooftops of Maplewood. Someone who made a promise. It was the closest Samuel had come to revealing anything, yet it somehow raised even more questions. Over the next several days, the story spread far beyond the town limits. The station's short feature accumulated thousands of views online. Messages arrived from neighboring cities. Viewers shared theories, memories, and personal stories about loved ones they had waited for. Yet among all the responses, one detail caught Olivia's attention. Several people recognized the bench. Not Samuel. The bench. One message came from a retired parks employee named Harold Benson. He claimed there was something unusual about that specific spot. Curious, Olivia arranged to meet him. Harold was 74 and spoke with the slow confidence of someone who had spent decades observing people without being noticed himself. They sat together beneath the covered pavilion near the park maintenance office while a chilly breeze rattled the nearby trees. "That bench was not always there," Harold explained. "The city replaced it years ago." Olivia leaned forward. "Then why does Samuel still use it?" Harold smiled faintly. "Because he asked for the replacement to be installed in the exact same location, down to the inch." Olivia frowned. "He measured it? Twice." Harold chuckled softly. The city planners thought he was joking. He was not. The answer stayed with Olivia all afternoon. Later that day, she returned to the park. Samuel arrived precisely on schedule, carrying the familiar satchel beneath his arm. The sky overhead was painted with thick clouds the color of steel. Winter seemed closer now. The air smelled of rain. Olivia joined him on the bench. For several minutes, they watched passing traffic in silence. Finally, she asked, "Why is this spot so important?" Samuel studied the road before answering. "Because this is where it happened." Olivia's heartbeat quickened. "What happened?" Samuel lowered his gaze toward the pavement. His expression softened, not into sadness, into remembrance. "A long time ago, there was another bench here. Smaller, painted green." Olivia waited. "And?" Samuel smiled faintly. "Someone sat beside me." A gust of wind swept through the park, carrying a spiral of golden leaves across the path. Samuel followed them with his eyes until they vanished beyond the trees. "That was the first day," he said quietly. Olivia wanted to ask more, but she sensed the fragile boundary around his memories. Push too hard, and he would retreat behind silence again. Instead, she simply listened. The next morning, an unexpected package arrived at the station. It contained no return address. Inside was a photocopy of an old community center newsletter from nearly 40 years earlier. Olivia spread the pages across her desk. Most of the newsletter contained announcements about bake sales, school fundraisers, and holiday events. Then she found a photograph. The image showed children gathered around a folding table covered with star-shaped cookies. Standing near the edge of the frame was a younger Samuel Carter. Beside him stood the same child from the newspaper photograph. This time the picture was clearer. The girl appeared to be around 8 years old. She was smiling at something outside the frame. Clutched in one hand was a cookie shaped like a star. Olivia stared at the image for several seconds. Then she noticed something else. A handwritten note had been circled beneath the photograph. Community volunteers Samuel Carter and local youth participants during the annual winter celebration. No names. No explanation. Just a brief caption. And a face frozen in time. That afternoon, dark clouds gathered above Maplewood. Rain began falling shortly before 4 o'clock. By 5, the park was nearly empty. Water streamed down pathways and pooled beside curbs. Yet Samuel remained on the bench, his coat damp with rain, his eyes fixed on the road. Olivia watched from beneath a nearby shelter. She could not explain why, but for the first time she felt a growing sense of urgency. Not because Samuel seemed weak, not because he seemed lonely, but because every passing day felt like another page turning in a story that had been waiting decades to reach its final chapter. That night, Maplewood seemed quieter than usual. A cold rain drifted against windows throughout town, turning streets into mirrors of blurred amber light. Inside his small apartment, Samuel sat alone at a wooden table positioned beside a narrow window. The room was simple: a bookshelf, a faded armchair, several framed military photographs hanging neatly on the wall. Nothing extravagant, nothing unnecessary. The soft ticking of an old clock filled the silence. For a long time, Samuel simply stared at the yellowed envelope resting in front of him. The paper had aged with him. Its corners were worn smooth. Tiny creases crossed its surface like roads on an old map. Carefully, he opened it. Inside was a single folded sheet. The handwriting was uneven, the letters slightly crooked, as if written by a young hand still learning patience. Samuel unfolded the page slowly. He had read those words thousands of times, yet he studied them now as if seeing them for the first time. Outside, rain traced gentle lines down the glass. The city lights shimmered through the water like distant stars. Samuel's eyes softened. A faint smile appeared on his face. Not because the letter brought comfort, because it brought connection. Across town, Olivia sat at her kitchen table reviewing notes from the past several weeks. Photographs were spread across the surface beside her laptop. The old newspaper clipping, the community center newsletter, images of Samuel sitting on the bench during different seasons. Summer sunshine, autumn leaves, winter snow, year after year. The same place, the same quiet routine. She leaned back and closed her eyes. Something still felt incomplete. Every clue seemed to point toward the child in the photographs. The cookies, the bench, the promise. Yet one question remained unanswered. Why had Samuel never stopped believing? Most people eventually accepted loss. Most people surrendered to uncertainty. Samuel never had. Olivia found herself returning to Walter Jennings' words. Hope for what? She looked toward the window where rain tapped softly against the glass. Then she made a decision. The next day, she visited the community center featured in the old newsletter. The building sat near the edge of town, tucked between a church and a public library. Time had changed it. New paint covered the walls. Modern signs hung near the entrance. Yet some things remained the same. An elderly receptionist named Margaret Holloway welcomed her inside. Margaret had worked there for more than 40 years. When Olivia showed her the old photograph, the woman adjusted her glasses and smiled immediately. I remember him, she said. Everyone remembers Samuel. Olivia pointed toward the young girl standing beside him. Do you remember her? Margaret studied the picture carefully. For several moments, she remained silent. Then her expression changed. Not surprise. Recognition. Oh my, she whispered. I have not seen this photograph in years. Olivia felt her pulse quicken. You know who she is? Margaret looked down at the image again. The smile faded into something gentler, something touched by memory. I remember those cookies, she said quietly. Every winter celebration. Samuel always made certain she got the first one. Olivia leaned forward. Who was she? Margaret's eyes lifted slowly. Through the nearby window, pale afternoon light spilled across the old photograph. Dust drifted through the air like tiny snowflakes. For a moment, it seemed the room itself was holding its breath. Then Margaret shook her head softly. I should not be the one to tell that story. Olivia's excitement faded into frustration. Please, anything could help. Margaret folded her hands together. Some stories belong to the people who lived them. Outside, church bells rang somewhere across town. The sound drifted through the quiet building. Olivia left with no answers, yet somehow with a stronger feeling than before. The mystery was no longer whether the child existed. She did. Multiple people remembered her. Multiple photographs proved it. The real mystery was what had happened afterward. Meanwhile, as evening settled over Maplewood, Samuel stood by his apartment window. The letter remained in his hand. Across the street, headlights moved through the darkness. People hurried home from work. Families gathered for dinner. Another ordinary day was ending. Samuel looked down at the familiar handwriting one more time. His fingers rested gently against the paper. Then, almost like a prayer carried on a whisper, he spoke into the quiet room. I never stopped waiting. And for the first time since Olivia had begun following his story, there was a feeling in the air that something was changing. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but like the first distant glow before sunrise, when the darkness does not disappear all at once. Yet somehow you know morning is finally on its way. The breakthrough arrived on a cold Tuesday morning. Olivia was halfway through a cup of coffee when her phone rang. The caller was Margaret Holloway. Her voice sounded different from before, quieter, almost uncertain. I found something, she said. 40 minutes later, Olivia sat across from her inside the community center archive room. A small cardboard box rested on the table between them. Its edges were worn with age. Dust clung to the corners. Margaret opened it carefully and removed a stack of photographs, newsletters, and volunteer records dating back decades. I was cleaning storage shelves, she explained. This box was misplaced years ago. Olivia immediately recognized Samuel in several photographs. Younger, stronger, smiling more often. Then she saw the girl, again and again, standing beside him during holiday events, holding cookies, feeding ducks in the park pond, decorating a Christmas tree inside the community center. The pictures told a story all by themselves. Samuel had not simply known the child. He had been a constant part of her life. Olivia turned over one photograph and froze. Written neatly across the back were 4 words. Emma Carter. Winter celebration. Olivia stared at the name. Emma Carter? Margaret nodded slowly. That was her. Olivia looked up. She shared his last name. Not originally. Margaret folded her hands. Samuel met Emma when she was very young. Her mother became seriously ill and passed away a few years later. Emma had no close relatives able to care for her. Samuel stepped in. Olivia felt her breath catch. He adopted her? Margaret nodded. He became her father in every way that mattered. The room fell silent. Suddenly, every piece began sliding into place. The cookies, the photographs, the promise, the bench. Samuel had not been waiting for a stranger. He had been waiting for his daughter. Olivia looked back at the photographs. Emma's smile seemed to shine through every image. What happened to her? Margaret exhaled slowly. Life happened. She opened a folder and removed a document. Years earlier, Samuel had received an opportunity that required extended travel overseas through a humanitarian veterans program. During that same period, Emma had earned a scholarship opportunity across the country. They planned to reunite once both commitments ended. Before leaving Maplewood, Emma gave Samuel a letter. The very letter he still carried. Olivia's eyes widened. The promise. Margaret nodded. She wrote that she would come back. Then why never return? Margaret shook her head. That part, nobody knows. Olivia sat in stunned silence. For weeks the town had assumed romance, mystery, or tragedy. The truth was simpler and somehow far more powerful. A father had spent decades honoring the last promise made by his daughter. That afternoon, Olivia returned to the park. Samuel was already there beneath a sky filled with pale winter clouds. The wind moved gently through the bare branches overhead. She sat beside him without speaking. For a long time, neither said a word. Then Olivia carefully placed one of the photographs on the bench between them. Samuel looked down. His eyes softened instantly. In the picture, Emma could not have been older than 9. She was laughing while holding a star-shaped cookie. Samuel smiled. She always laughed like that. Olivia turned toward him. Her name was Emma. Samuel's gaze remained on the photograph. After several seconds, he nodded. Not surprised. Not upset. Simply accepting. Yes, he whispered. My daughter. Across the road, cars continued moving through Maplewood exactly as they always had. But for Olivia, everything had changed. The mystery was finally solved. Yet as she watched Samuel staring at the photograph, another realization settled quietly into her heart. The story had never been about discovering who Emma was. The story was about finding out whether a promise made so many years ago could still find its way home. The story aired on a Friday evening. Olivia had expected local interest. What happened instead stunned everyone at the station. Within 24 hours, the segment spread far beyond Maplewood. Thousands of people watched the story of the veteran who had spent decades returning to the same bench because of a promise from his daughter. Messages poured in from across the country. Some viewers shared memories of parents they had lost touch with. Others wrote about reunions that happened years later than anyone thought possible. By Sunday afternoon, the station's website was overwhelmed with responses. Yet one message stood apart from all the others. It arrived without fanfare. No dramatic subject line. No explanation. Just 6 simple words. I think you found my father. Olivia stared at the screen. Her pulse quickened instantly. Attached to the message was a photograph. The image showed a woman in her early 50s standing beside a lake. Her dark hair was streaked with silver. Her smile was warm and familiar. Unmistakably familiar. Olivia looked at the old photographs spread across her desk. The shape of the eyes. The smile. The expression. It was her. Emma. Within an hour, Olivia was speaking with the woman through a video call. Tears filled Emma's eyes before the conversation had even begun. I never stopped looking for him, she whispered. The years unfolded piece by piece. After leaving Maplewood, Emma's scholarship had taken her across the country. Then life became complicated. Opportunities, responsibilities, moves between states, family obligations, and years that seemed to pass faster than anyone expected. She wrote letters that were returned. She searched records that led nowhere. Eventually, she believed Samuel had relocated. Then time created distance. Not emotional distance. Practical distance. The kind that grows quietly until decades have passed. But she never forgot the promise. Not once. On Monday morning, Maplewood awoke beneath a pale winter sky. The air was crisp. Frost clung to rooftops and bare tree branches. At 3:45 in the afternoon, Samuel arrived at the park exactly as he always did. He settled onto the bench and looked toward the road. Nothing about his routine changed. Nothing suggested that this day would be different from the thousands that came before it. Across town, a rental car rolled slowly through unfamiliar streets. Emma gripped the steering wheel tightly. Her hands trembled. The park appeared ahead. The same trees. The same pathways. The same bench. For a moment, she simply sat there, breathing, gathering courage. Then she stepped out of the car. The winter air touched her face. Leaves rustled softly across the pavement. In the distance, Samuel sat exactly where he always sat, watching the road, waiting. Emma took a step forward, then another, and another. Her eyes filled with tears she no longer tried to hide. Samuel remained focused on the street ahead, until suddenly something changed. A shadow crossed the sidewalk. Footsteps approached. Familiar somehow. Impossible and familiar at the same time. Slowly, Samuel turned his head. Time seemed to stop. The traffic noise faded. The wind disappeared. Even the distant sounds of the city felt suspended. Emma stood a few feet away. Neither moved. Neither spoke. 50 years old and suddenly 8 again. 82 years old and suddenly young again. Samuel's cane slipped gently from his hand onto the bench beside him. His eyes widened. Not with surprise. With recognition. The kind that survives every passing year. Emma smiled through tears. Hi, Dad. Samuel stared at her for several seconds that felt like an entire lifetime. Then the smile appeared. The same smile visible in the old photographs from decades earlier. Quiet. Warm. Certain. He rose slowly from the bench. Emma stepped forward. The distance between them disappeared. And after all those years, the promise finally came home. The days that followed felt different in ways neither Samuel nor Emma could fully explain. Maplewood remained the same town it had always been. The coffee shop still opened before sunrise. Children still raced across the park after school. The old clock tower still marked each passing hour. Yet for Samuel, the world seemed quieter now. Not because less noise surrounded him, but because a question he had carried for decades had finally been answered. Every afternoon, he and Emma returned to the park together. They sat on the same bench beneath the same trees where so many years of waiting had passed. Sometimes they talked for hours. Sometimes they barely spoke at all. There was no need to rush. They were no longer trying to catch up with lost time. They were simply living the time they still had. Olivia visited occasionally, though she was careful not to intrude. She often watched from a distance as father and daughter shared stories beneath the winter sky. Samuel would point toward a building downtown and tell Emma about a memory she had forgotten. Emma would laugh and correct details he remembered differently. Their conversations flowed naturally, as though the missing years had been a long detour rather than a permanent separation. One afternoon, several weeks after their reunion, Emma arrived carrying a small box. The sunlight reflected softly off fresh snow gathered along the edges of the path. Samuel looked curious as she placed the box on the bench between them. "What is this?" he asked. Emma smiled. "Something I should have given you a long time ago." Samuel opened the box carefully. Inside were dozens of letters. Some were folded neatly. Others showed signs of age and travel. Every envelope carried his name. His hands trembled slightly as he lifted the first one. "I wrote these over the years," Emma said quietly. "Some came back. Some were sent to old addresses. Some never made it far enough to return. But I kept writing anyway." Samuel stared at the stack of letters. For a long moment, he could not speak. The winter breeze moved gently through the bare branches overhead. Finally, he looked at Emma. "You never forgot." Emma's eyes filled with tears. "Not for a single day." Samuel nodded slowly. Then he reached into his satchel and removed the yellowed envelope he had carried all those years. Together, they placed the old letter beside the stack of newer ones. One promise. Hundreds of attempts to answer it. The silence that followed felt warm despite the cold air. Months later, spring arrived in Maplewood. Green leaves returned to the trees. Flowers bloomed along the pathways. One afternoon, Olivia walked through the park and noticed something that made her stop. The bench was empty. For the first time since she had known Samuel Carter, the bench sat alone beneath the sunlight. She felt a brief moment of concern until she heard laughter nearby. Turning toward the pond, she spotted Samuel and Emma walking together along the water's edge. Slowly, comfortably, no longer watching the road, no longer waiting for someone to appear. The bench remained behind them, quiet and still. It had served its purpose. Years later, visitors to Maplewood would occasionally ask about the old veteran who used to sit there every day. Some residents remembered pieces of the story. Others remembered only fragments. But those who knew the truth always smiled the same way before answering. They would point toward the bench and say that it was never really about waiting. It was about believing. As the evening sun settled across the park, golden lights spilled through the trees and stretched across the empty wood slats. A gentle breeze carried the scent of fresh grass through the air. Cars moved along the distant road. Birds crossed the sky overhead. And there, beneath the fading light, the bench remained exactly where it had always been. The difference was simple. No one was waiting anymore.